Hi, it's Eric the Plasterer here, and welcome back to plasterer.org.uk, the home of Ask the Plasterer. Oh yes. I don't do a lot of rendering anymore. Main reason being our great British weather. I booked this job in a few weeks prior to what you see here, and it poured with rain all that week, so I had to take some time off. So that's the reason I don't normally do much rendering anymore. But anyway, all that said, I am doing it now, and instead of it raining on these 2 days, the one for my scratch coat and the one for my second coat, it was the first 2 hottest days we'd had at this point in the year so far. Now, rendering in direct sunlight is never a great idea, but the way this garden was facing, south facing, and the sun was just coming straight down and covering the whole wall all the way across. Now, this garage wall, obviously it's been rendered before. It's got quite a few cracks in it, but the base of it is solid. Basically, it wasn't going anywhere, and you'd have a hell of a hard time knocking it all off. So the best option here is to put your scratch coat up, but in this scratch coat I'm going to use the plastic mesh. The plastic mesh. Now, this wall, prior to me doing anything to it, had my traditional coat of neat PVA, just the one. Needless to say, that dried more or less straight away. There was no waiting time at all. Another thing you just need to be a little bit careful of is to wear plenty of sun cream if you're going to go without a top on. And if you've got really sensitive skin, just don't take your t-shirt off. Word of advice there. Plus, it'll hide all the lockdown fat that you've possibly gained since lockdown. Okay, I'm using Optinet plastic mesh along here. Now, a lot of guys would render from up to the top, sort of downwards, and then hang their mesh from the top and work it down. But this is quite a long stretch of wall, so I decided I would cover the bottom part first, and then take my my render mesh right the way along the wall. And I'm just trimming it off there, where it goes into a wooden post, and there will be a stop bead going on at that end a bit later on. As you can see, once you've got the mesh on top of that first scratch coat, or on top of that first coat, it does trail in quite nicely. You just literally run your trowel over that, and it comes through the mesh and helps hold the mesh there nice and secure, and it literally disappears. This first coat is a 3-to-1 mix, and although I'm rubbing up the second coat, there's no bashing going on or anything like that, I have put a fair amount of waterproofer in this coat, because I know the following day is also going to be hot, and the sun is going to be directly on this all day long. So I need to basically keep as much time holding this back as I possibly can. So there's a waterproofer in this scratch coat, even though there's only a rubbed up coat going on top of that the next day. Okay, once you've got that on, press down. The way I do it then is to get my trusty speed skin plastic blade and rule this off. Now, if you were going over breeze blocks, you need to be even more wary of how much suction there will be in them for doing this kind of work in this kind of heat. So the fact that this wall had been already rendered and painted white, and then had my PVA on, obviously helped in it not being as porous as it might have been if it was just a new block wall. And here I just render my take my speed skim across, and as usual, as when I'm plastering, take it up and down as well, just to kind of get that levelled off. Now for me, this levels off a rendered garage wall as level as you need to get it, unless you want to turn it sideways and play pool on it or bowls. That, in my opinion, using the speed skim is absolutely fine, as opposed to rolling it off with a straight edge. But some purists will only do this with a straight edge, which is absolutely fine. But this is the way I do it. Now I'm putting the top part of my first coat on, and all you need to make sure with the netting when you put it on is that it overlaps the one at the bottom, so you've got no gap between the two. I mean, I don't think it would be a major issue if there was a small gap there, but if you overlap it, then you know it's going to be absolutely fine. And there should be no way that these are the cracks that were in the original wall, because it was so solid, would come through the plastic mesh and be able to push their way through the new render. Again, here I'm just smoothing over the top of getting it nice and ready for that mesh to go on. It's surprising because when you do this and you think, well, will the mesh push on and get buried by the amount that you've got there, and that you'd be able to scratch it as well? And the short answer is yes, unless it starts to dry a little bit too much, and then you will have to put a fair bit more render over the top just to hold it secure and to cover the mesh. But generally speaking, on this part here, and under the normal conditions, heat wise, weather wise, the mesh has no problem at all bedding into that first coat and disappearing behind the render. Again, putting this on long ways is a bit more tricky, especially if you're doing it on your own. But I found that worked for me. And then that top one is overlapping the one on the bottom. This particular mesh is quite a thick gauge, but then you know it's gonna do the job. This render isn't going anywhere once it's gone off. I think on this particular piece I'd cut that slightly short to the end, but however, the piece I trimmed off of the bottom piece earlier on is just the right size. Again, it slightly overlaps on the side and at the bottom, and does a lovely job. You'll be pleased to know I've kept most of the detail in this video. I have edited it down from about 2.5 hours to what we've got now. I could have made it shorter, but if it jumps through too much of the detail, then any guys that are watching this to try and pick up the tips of how you're putting your render on and how you're getting your plastic in and how you're bedding it in, it's best to have it as well as long as needs be to be able to get some detail out of the video, and it just not being another one of those perfect videos of someone doing some rendering or some finish. Okay, so I've got the bottom meshed up now, that left hand side, and it's just that top right hand piece left to go. same procedure. I mean, this is taking a while now, and although the sun is directly on that, it's yeah, it's staying nice. What would be really good is if the guys out there could invent an ad mix to maybe slow down the sand cement even more. Okay, what you can see happening here, the initial part, again it beds on okay, but the bottom end, you see the sand and cement is starting to pick up a little bit here, so it's not coming through the mesh as well as it should. You can see that bottom bit of the mesh is still hanging slightly loose because the sand and cement there has become just that little bit too dry to really be able to bed it in properly. But this isn't an issue, as you can just see in a minute, you can go over the top with a little bit more sand and cement. Okay, now it's at this point, I think, where I have an issue that you sometimes can get as a plasterer. Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. If you take your eye off the ball and do something just a little bit silly, then it's just part of the way it goes. Okay, so here you can see where I'm going over the top of the mesh, where it dried a little bit too much. Now, behind it here, it was a little too dry, so I thought I'd pull it back and just put a bit there and a little bit more. So what I should have done is push that plastic back, but I didn't push it back. Let it go. Never mind. Never a great idea. But it's not the end of the world. The only issue now is that bit of mesh is full of heavy cement. It's in between all the little fibres. So I endeavour to put on a bit more render, and then try and stick this back up. Now it is, as I say, where it is now wet, it's got cement sticking in it. It's not having it. Putting something on this long, and well, that doesn't look like a lot of cement on the actual mesh. It's enough to say no, I'm not having this. Unless you have another plan, I'm not staying up here. Unless you can get some help, but I haven't got any help over you. So what to do? Well, what to do? Come on now, think. Brainwave. Oh, I know. I will hang it in the traditional fashion from the top down, because it's a bit more manageable. Then I can bed that top in, and then just where it overlaps a bit further down. That's it. Look at that. That's lovely. And just where it overlaps, I can get my trusty plasterer's scissors, which are as sharp as a blunt stick, and trim that off. Again, so it's just overlapping the one underneath. Look at that, like a hot knife through butter. Okay, so then that can have a bit more render on the top of that. And we're back on course. Thank God for that. And the sun is still shining and it is still very hot. but we persevere. Now the piece that I've cut off from the bottom is, as it turns out, just the right size to finish the last top section for next to this piece. Amazing. And obviously being smaller, easier to handle. Well, fairly easy to handle. Again, luckily this last end piece of the wall is shaded by the tree, so as we progress with the work, this end bit takes a little bit longer to go off, but at least you can be cracking on with sorting out the wall that is in the direct sunlight and not have to worry too much about the render that's being protected by the shade of the bush. And there we go, some lovely creamy mix over the top. It won't be long now before we can go home and have a nice cold beer on the go. Still got another quick roll off. And the trusty speed skill, which is really getting the worst for wear now. Well, I have to treat myself to a couple of new blades and a couple of new handles, like Trigger's broom. And now all we need is a trusty scratcher. Put a lovely key into that. Again, although it's been a while, the render is still soft enough that this digs nice grooves into the render without scraping the render away. Just digs the grooves in, which is what you want really. I know a lot of guys now won't be using sand cement renders now, they're using K-Rend, Monocouche and any other kind of silicone based scratch renders. You more or less put the gear on and just scratching it off, which it can look really good, but has been known on some occasions, if it's in a kind of damp areas, to get be quite clingy for possible mould growth if it's not well maintained. That's give me indoor plastering any day of the week, as opposed to this. Okay, there's my render stop bead. I'm just using that where it butts up to the fence post. And this can be allowed to go off with the scratch coat, so you've got a nice firm bead there for doing your top rubbing up coat the following day. And here we are, day 2. Rubbed up top coat. Oh, look at that, it's another lovely sunny hot day. The tan's doing well, only slightly burnt. Now, just to be on the extra precautious side, apart from the fact that the scratch coat has got a lot of waterproof in it to kill that porosity, so it doesn't suck the water out of your top coat so quickly, I also put another neat coat of PVA over that scratch coat, which isn't in the video, prior to this. Again, in the heat it didn't take very long to dry. And now I've mixed up my 4:1 sand cement. I personally use soft and sharp mix. 2 sharp and 1 soft. That's fine sharp. You've got to be so careful not to get lumbered with sharp sand. It turns out to be floor laying sharp sand with the little stones in, which you do not want when you are rendering a wall. Great for floor laying, but not for putting on the wall. Again, obviously, so I've killed the suction as much as is possible for that on that scratch coat, to give me enough time to be able to get this on. When you take into account it's going to be a rubbed up render. Under normal circumstances, if you put waterproof in that bottom scratch coat, and you're doing this in the autumn, it would give you plenty of time to get your top coat on, rubbing up. But how long you might be hanging around waiting for it to start to pull in so you could get it rubbed up is anybody's guess. But in this kind of heat, the longer you can hold it back, the better, because you want to be able to put on as much as you can for rubbing up, and be able to drop back and rub it up as and when it's needed. If it gets that a little bit too dry too soon, you've had it basically. Again, so basically I'm laying that on the same way I lay on finish. I'm going from the left to right for right-handed spread, because the 2 coats are quite tight. I was putting on very thick render, and I'd probably work from the opposite side and put some render screeds up, which is basically a render screed across the top and across the bottom, level them up, and then basically fill in the middle and put my plaster in from the top downwards, so I'm hooking on from underneath. But this method for this wall, at this thickness of render, basically putting it on the same way I'd put on a skim coat. Obviously it is thicker than a skim coat. And again, ruling that off with a speed skim. Again, no doubt you could get this closer to perfect if you used a rule on it, especially a sort of a 6 or 7 foot rule. But I find that this thickness, and on a wall like this, there's no, well, for me personally anyway, there's no real reason for it. And when something is drying this quickly, you haven't really got too much time to be messing about with a rule. You need to get the stuff on, and you need to get it ruled off as best as you can, as quickly as you can. Okay, I'm dropping back now with my plastic float. Start rubbing up. Again, thankfully the bit behind the tree to the right is protected by some shade, which gives me some respite on that while I drop back and crack on with the rubbing up in this part. Now anywhere I find hollows, or you might find hollows when you're doing this rubbing up, you just take some gear off your hook. If it's gone off enough, you can just rub that into any dips or hollows that you've got with your trowel, with your plastic float. And you're best here like to use a bigger float as opposed to a smaller one, because a bigger float keeps a flatter surface. Now at some point soon here, where I feel it's getting a little bit too dry, I get my my water spray bottle and apply some water where it's needed. Again, this is what I'm doing here. It's got to be at a certain, if it's too dry, again putting water on it will not help. If it's just starting to pick up and you need it to be that little bit wetter, then the water is great. If, however, which I did start to find as well at one stage here, I've had to go over to the sponge finish. Now I would normally finish any rendered wall off with a sponge anyway, because you get a nicer finish with that. Currently here, still on with a plastic float and a little bit of water. Okay, I've moved on to the sponge at this point. And the sponge is much more gentle on the surface. If it's starting to get a little bit too dry, where the plastic float is causing more damage than it is rubbing up, then that's when the sponge is great. Also, if an area is slightly wetter and where a plastic float can catch in it, a sponge won't, and that will help you get that nice smooth surface. Again, especially in this kind of heat, if you can get this amount on and get it all nicely troweled up with a plastic float. I mean, you might be able to do it with a power float, but they are good, but you can't work miracles with them if the stuff is going off too quickly. Again, underneath the tree there, stayed wet enough, I'm pleased to say, to be able to sort that out at the end. Again, where it's a little bit wetter there, I'm able to revert back to the float, and then I will go over that again with the sponge, and the whole thing will be under a sponge finish. And that's just about it. If you've got any questions and comments, polite comments preferably, leave them and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Thanks for subscribing, guys. Hit the like button. Apparently I'm not getting enough likes according to YouTube, so we need to get cracking with that. And I'll see you in the next video. Cheers for now. Bye.